Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, body positivity, and health at every size. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified intuitive eating counselor specializing in weight-inclusive wellness. Join me as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beefing. Now I'm ready for the world, trying to sink my teeth in, stacking it.
Hey there, welcome to episode 83. My guest today is Emily Fonnesbeck, who is a fellow body positive and health at every size dietitian. And I really wanted to share this episode at this point in the holiday season because I know it's getting tough out there, right? I'm sure that you're probably getting pressure already on your social media feeds from people who are trying to lose weight for the new year, talking about detoxes they're going to do, right? And like come January 1st, it's just going to sort of explode. So I wanted to help you guys get out in front of it with an episode to help you sort of recommit to body positivity and against orthorexia, which is the unhealthy obsession with healthy eating, right? That our society is gripped with right now. The healthism that is out there is, to my mind, sort of orthorexia on a massive scale. And so in this episode, Emily and I get into what orthorexia is, her experience with it, and why purveyors of elimination diets and food sensitivity testing can often worsen the problem. So you'll hear Emily share her experience with all of that and more in just a moment, and I can't wait to get into it. First, I want to just give you a couple of resources for improving your relationship with food. So the first is my free quiz to assess your relationship with food, and you'll get your results via email with a bunch of personalized tips to help you make peace with food wherever you are right now. So you can take the quiz and get your results today at christyharrison.com/quiz. That's christyharrison.com/quiz. The second resource I want to share is my intuitive eating online course. And that is a 13-week program that I created to help you work through all the principles of intuitive eating in depth and really demystify and troubleshoot some of the common areas where I see people getting stuck. So I'll show you how to recognize the diet mentality, even in its subtle forms, and how to start substituting healthy thoughts instead. I'll also share my secrets to making food and exercise choices from a place of self-care rather than one of self-control. And I'll teach you how to navigate emotional eating and how to stop alternating between restricting and overeating. And there's lots and lots more too. It's a multimedia course. And as one participant recently said, I really love the multimedia type approach. The lectures, the notes, the infographics, and podcasts, they're all so encouraging and educational and helpful. Another person said in regards to the diet mentality, I keep uncovering ways that I'm tied to diet mentality, even though I would have never thought so. I realize how many times I don't give myself permission and hear the shoulds about what to eat in my mind. Several participants have said that the course has helped them make peace with off-limits foods already. And as one person said after completing the course, this course has been life-changing for me. It has completely opened my eyes and allowed me to let go of some of the last parts of my eating disorder that I didn't even realize were still a part of me. I can't say thank you enough times for this course and for all the work you do in this field. So if you'd like to join others on this intuitive eating journey, you can go to christyharrison.com/course to learn more and sign up. That's christyharrison.com/course. And then finally, a little public service request. If you like the podcast and want to help us reach more people who need to hear the body positive message, you can leave us a great review on iTunes. So, 5 stars if you want. Just open up your iTunes on your computer or the podcasts app on your phone, type in Food Psych to the search bar, click on the result that comes up under podcasts, and then go to the ratings and reviews tab. There you can leave a rating and review, sharing what you love about the podcast, and it really warms my heart to get these. I'm always so grateful for the nice reviews. And they also help bring us up in the ratings so that other people can find the body positive message. So if you want to spread the word about the podcast, the ratings and reviews are really the best way to do it. The second best way to do it, though, is sharing directly with your friends and family. So if you like an episode in particular, grab the link from it either on iTunes or from my website on the show notes, and then just send it to a friend, share it with them, right? So sometimes it can be a little sensitive to share these body positive messages people have their own journeys with this stuff and their own ideas, right? But if you have friends or family that you've spoken with about the anti-diet movement or who seem receptive and open to a different way of thinking, maybe share an episode and see if that can spark a flame in them too. So you can do that all through the podcast app on your phone or iTunes on your computer, or you can head to christyharrison.com/foodpsych to find links to your favorite episodes. And thank you all so much for your support, by the way. It really means the world to me that we're growing and reaching so many people. And the podcast has just really taken off, particularly in the last 6 months or so. And I'm just so grateful for that and for all of your support. So now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Emily Fonnesbeck. I spoke with her via Skype from her home outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
I actually had a really great relationship with food growing up. My parents both worked growing up. So my mom worked a lot and she actually taught elementary school, and she still cooked every night. I have 5 siblings. So I think a lot of that was probably financial more than anything else. So we had family meals together. I never, ever got a message that my worth was based on how I looked. I was never shamed for food choices. Obviously, I was encouraged to eat fruits and vegetables and choose healthy choices some of the time, but it wasn't anything overwhelming or obnoxious. So I really didn't struggle at all until later.
So there was no message like, you don't get dessert in the house every day or anything like that?
Not at all. I think back, and our kitchen was stocked with a wide range of foods. I never felt like food insecure, like I didn't have access to what I wanted when I wanted it, which I think was, in hindsight, especially now working with individuals who struggle with disordered eating, I was super lucky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
So it didn't start till later for you. When did the disordered relationship with food begin?
So I was actually pregnant with my first son. I've got 2 kids. I've got 2 boys. One's 11 and one's 6. And my 6-year-old's adopted and my 11-year-old's biological. So I was actually pregnant with him as a nutrition student. I was actually doing my internship at the time I was pregnant with him. I know,
exhausting.
Right? It was kind of a surprise, a good surprise, but it was a surprise. And so I actually gave birth to him the day after I finished. Like we finished on a Friday and I had him on a Saturday.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I was actually really concerned that I wouldn't be able to finish. Luckily I did. But because I was, in school and working full-time for free, full-time.
Working for free, yep.
I didn't really prepare at all for what was going to happen after. I was just so concerned about getting done. And I had a great pregnancy. And honestly, I think about this a lot. I probably had the best body image of my life when I was pregnant. I felt so good. I loved being pregnant. I had a really easy pregnancy. Obviously, that's not everyone's experience, but I really loved being pregnant. But what I didn't love was after. I wasn't prepared for all of the physical changes that haven't happened after. And it just kind of hit me in the face, like being at home full time now with this new baby that I was trying to figure out and then recovering from childbirth. And I mean, I'll be really, really honest. I adore my kids. I love them. I wouldn't trade motherhood for the world, but it's probably the hardest, most intimidating, emotionally exhausting thing I do. So it was just totally new for me. And I felt a lot really out of control in a lot of ways. And so my way of controlling that, or feeling a sense of control, was I started exercising more and more and started eating less and less.
That's so interesting as a recent graduate from a nutrition program. Like you made it all the way through without sort of falling prey to that during your training, but then it was the personal body image stuff that really triggered it.
Yeah. And, that's a good point, because I definitely, I have perfectionistic tendencies, type A. You don't need to go far in dietetics field to find us.
True.
Mm-hmm. And so I was one of those nutrition students that was somewhat type A, and I did want to eat really well, and I did love exercise, but I don't really feel like it was preoccupying or a source of anxiety for me at all, until all of a sudden I was faced with this huge life change and stressor, and I just needed a way to cope. And that was what I turned to.
Yeah, it was kind of lying in wait for the right moment.
Exactly. Yeah.
What inspired you to go into nutrition in the first place?
I kind of like from sports nutrition, like I was really into running and I loved it. And I just loved the idea of like fueling your body well and increased athletic performance. And I did some volunteering with the dietitians at the hospital when I was in school. And I love science. I love like the science of nutrition that like, and I was super interested in clinical nutrition. Actually, I do not know why now because I couldn't ever do that.
Right. So working in a hospital for anyone who's not a nutritionist, but yeah,
Yeah.
like the tube feeding and
Uh-huh.
renal, all that stuff.
Yeah. But it was super fascinating at the time. And so I really just loved, the science behind it. It wasn't really for any like super personal reasons. I just very science and logic minded. So it made sense for me. And it felt like a good fit I knew I wanted to have kids and it felt like a good fit for a family. There was a lot of different opportunities so I could be flexible with it. So it felt like a good fit. It was. I don't regret it at all, although it probably led to more issues down the road, of course. But
right. Because sometimes having that knowledge coupled with the perfectionistic tendencies can really lead down a bad path, right?
yes, exactly. I actually stayed in that like functionally dysfunctional relationship with food and exercise for probably like 5 or 6 years. Like the socially acceptable, just really preoccupied with food and exercise, like just regular, so pervasive in our culture. So it was super easy for me to fly under the radar, especially because I was a dietitian. Like I could be anal about food, right?
Yeah.
It was super easy for me just to fly under the radar and just be one of those that was super into fitness and eating really clean, right?
Mm-hmm. People sort of expect that.
Uh-huh.
So when did you know it was becoming a problem?
Well, probably like I said, 5 or 6 years into it, the physical symptoms of extreme exercise and under eating really caught up with me. And I actually got a pelvic stress fracture.
Oh, wow.
And was totally out for like 6 months to a year, which was super good for me. Like I needed that break, but my mindset was still that this was super inconvenient and really frustrating, and I just couldn't wait to get back to exercise. I didn't take it as a red flag or a sign that something was wrong or like serious issue. I just was like, oh, it'll heal, and then I'll be back to normal. Around the same time, I did again like a lot of physical symptoms just kind of caught up with me. So I definitely had this stress fracture that was super painful and took a while to heal. But I also was having like some fatigue and headaches and digestive issues for sure, like a lot of digestive issues, which is very common. And I still saw it as a result of like not eating or exercising perfect enough. Well, I just need to be more disciplined. That's why. Versus like actual physical symptoms because I was under eating and over exercising.
It's so amazing how that happens. That was very much the case for me too. I looked around for the culprit or the thing that was causing all these health issues, and I stumbled on gluten. That was my way of explaining it, that I was gluten intolerant, and that if I could just perfectly avoid gluten, and then, for a brief period too, I was like, maybe it's also dairy or soy or, it was this rabbit hole of what's not perfect in my diet, as opposed to how am I relating to food in a really dysfunctional way that might be causing these issues.
Yes. Which it's like you say, it's such a slippery slope. Like it starts with gluten or it starts with whatever, and then it's all sorts of other things. Like I don't feel better if I'm from no gluten, so it must be gluten and something else and something else and something else, right?
Right, exactly.
Especially from a digestive standpoint, because like healing the gut is super trendy right now, right?
Yep.
So it's really easy to get sucked into that.
I'm so curious to talk with you about your background in that, because I saw that you're a certified LEAP therapist, and that's all about healing the gut, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I love you brought that up, because like I'd made the rounds with all these different diets, and then I found out about the LEAP program. So for those of you who are listening and not familiar, the LEAP protocol, it's a certified LEAP therapist, is dietitians can get certified as a LEAP therapist, which is dealing with food sensitivities. So you do this mediator release test that test for your food sensitivities. And then the LEAP protocol is an elimination diet based on the results of that mediator release test, which, like, I'm going to ruffle some feathers talking about this probably, which I'm totally okay with.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I think this is something that a lot of people go down the rabbit hole with.
Yeah, exactly. And so I will say, there might be people out there that could possibly benefit, but in my experience, more often than not, it just further encourages this fear and anxiety about food. Like, food is going to hurt me, so I have to be really vigilant and disciplined with it.
Right, totally. I'm glad you mentioned that because I think it is really important to note that for pretty much everyone, especially anyone who's struggling already in their relationship with food, like that's the primary thing to look at. It's probably going to do you more harm than good to start eliminating different foods at that point.
Yes.
I've had a few clients who've had, seemingly very healthy relationships with food, never had a problem, never had a body image issue, and they started having some digestive troubles, and those were the folks where I was like, okay, that, it definitely seems like something might be going on here related to your gut, but otherwise it's so complicated.
Yes.
That's like 2 people in like hundreds,
Yeah. Yeah. Like that ratio. Exactly. Like it. And people, I think, have that reversed. Like they think that food sensitivities are more common than disordered eating, and I would disagree.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, did you end up getting certified as a LEAP therapist, like while you were going through all that stuff of your own, or how did that play out?
Yes, it was totally selfish. The reason I did it was like, well, I'm going to heal my gut, like I'm going to certify as a LEAP therapist and I'm going to figure this out and I'm just going to figure out what my triggers are and then I'm going to feel amazing and I'll just be right on my merry way, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I actually did the food sensitivity tests and the elimination diet like 3 times in the span of like a year and a half. And each time, I mean, it was just a mess. Like each time I would learn more and more foods that I had a problem with until eventually I was literally down to like 5 or 6 foods that I'd allow myself to eat.
Oh.
Like deeply in the throes of orthorexia. I was so anxious and obsessed and preoccupied and would spend hours like researching different foods and food constituents and products and what could possibly be my issue. And I still, it is like crazy to me. It literally is crazy that I didn't see it for what it was. And I think I knew. I think on some level, obviously I knew. But I was still just so intense on this has got to be a problem with me not being perfect enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also, were you trained at all in eating disorders in school? Because in my experience,
no, of course not.
Yeah, like being a dietitian, you don't get that training really. You might have one elective or a unit in some class that talks about eating disorders, but the vast majority of it is treating diseases or, gut issues or whatever with food. So I think it's natural that you'd sort of go down that channel versus thinking like, oh, how's my relationship with food, which is rarely discussed.
Yes, exactly. And it really taught me a lot of compassion and understanding for how alluring and seductive that promise is. Food can heal you. And if you just stick to this diet, all your problems will go away. Because I was like physically a mess, mentally too, but physically a mess. Like my digestion was all over the place. My bladder was so weak from malnutrition, it couldn't even hold urine. I was having migraines regularly. My joints like ached and ached and ached. Like I remember laying in bed at night and it would hurt for my hips to hit the mattress, like a soft mattress. I would sleep with a pillow between my knees. Like it was pretty bad.
Yeah. And it's so interesting how that in the sort of culture now, all those things are so commonly linked to like a sensitivity, or maybe you have a gluten intolerance or this or that inflammation, heal your inflammation, which is actually caused by food restriction and overexercise.
Exactly. Like that is the exact situation I was in. I was just thinking, I just got to get rid of this inflammation. I just have got to get rid of that. And I think that it's super important to note here too, for anyone that might be listening, orthorexia has been termed the OCD of like eating disorders. Like it's really obsessive and compulsive. It became not a choice for me anymore. It really felt like that. Like it was such this compulsion to have to exercise or to have to restrict my food intake or to have to research or to figure this out. It felt so overwhelming and consuming. I can't even describe, like it really, words fail to describe what that really felt like.
Yeah. What did that do with your relationships? Like how did you handle being a mom with all of this and maybe a wife too?
Yeah, so that's an excellent point, which is something that I like take full responsibility for. Well, and I should also say this too. Like I was a practicing registered dietitian at the time.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, let's just all pause here for a minute and just let that sink in. Like I had to really let that sink in, and I take full responsibility. I've issued like public apologies on the blog. And this is why I'm so open about my experience, because if anything, I just wanted to make amends going forward for probably any of the fear that I helped spread. So that's, I think, super important. And I don't think that my experience is really unique in terms of health professionals or dietitians in particular. Obviously, I can't speak for everyone, but I don't know that my situation is totally unique, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. I've heard very similar things from so many dietitians and have worked with dietitians who were clearly struggling and in the throes of something. And it is really something to be compassionate with, I think, because so many of us are attracted to this profession in the first place because of our issues, or, our issues with food and perfectionism get stirred up by the profession and by the work. And it's so easy to fall into that rabbit hole. But I think it definitely creates a complicated dynamic, because for the people who are struggling with disordered eating themselves and go to see a dietitian who's also struggling, it can really sort of fan the flames, and there's no real support in our profession for that either. Therapists have sort of a professional requirement to get supervision from other therapists, to have an outlet for whatever gets stirred up by their work. And dietitians don't have that. In the eating disorder community, it's considered best practices to do that, and I do it, but there's no requirement. I don't have to.
Yep.
I'm certainly grateful to be able to do that, but so many dietitians are just out there working and having all kinds of stuff going on in their own lives that they can't really deal with.
Yeah, exactly. I fully agree. Yeah.
It's kind of I think our profession needs to do more to support dietitians who are struggling with this stuff, and even during school, maybe giving screenings and giving counseling to people who are getting this kind of thing stirred up in them. Because I feel like if I had that support in school, it probably would have cut down on the time it took for full recovery. Yeah. Helped avoid giving some bad advice to people along the way too.
Yes, I 1,000% agree. And I think it's wise to protect those that we're working with and also protect ourselves. I think there needs to be a little bit, obviously, more support for that, especially since eating disorders are life-threatening. I mean, it's not just, it's kind of an unhealthy relationship with food. It's much more extreme than that, and probably more than people really realize, since it is kind of glamorized in our current culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's so expected of people in our profession, right, to be sort of orthorexic and obsessive about food. And it really shouldn't be. Nobody should be living in a prison like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, I want to, there's so much good stuff here. I want to come back to like how you sort of got into the public apology part, and also sort of separately like your personal life and how that was affected by all of this stuff too. Because being a mom, I'm sure there was some interesting things to navigate with that. And also your energy was probably very much curtailed too.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't have a lot of mental space or emotional energy to put into all these other things. Now, I will say that I think I hid this pretty well. I mean, I say that, but I'm sure there were signs everywhere. But at the same time, I don't know that anyone really understood how severe it was, because I was still a perfectionist. I'd still get up in the morning, and I'd still get my kids ready for school, and I'd still go to work, and I'd put on a smile and make it look like everything was okay, and then I'd eat by myself. However, of course, my husband for sure noticed. I mean, that's who probably got the brunt of it all. And I've actually given him a lot of shout outs and blog posts that I've written about it. Cause I mean, he was very, very supportive, but never encouraging problematic behaviors. He was really honest with me about how he felt, while also allowing me room to grow and learn from the experience. And he never, ever, ever said anything negative about my body, has never, even like when I was underweight, not even a like, you should gain weight. There was just never, it was like, Emily, you're fine. Don't need to worry about it. Food is yummy. You should eat it. Like, he has a very healthy relationship with food and with himself and in his own confidence. And I just really could never have dreamt what a blessing he was to me when I married him, the day I married him. Like, he's just been such a gift. So he deserves a lot of credit for kind of sticking with it and being supportive, but not enabling.
Yeah, that's a fine line to walk, definitely.
And then, of course, my kids, I think that once I started having enough food to actually have the ability to think clearly, I definitely started seeing like the mess that I had made. In particular, probably rock bottom for me was one day I walked into my 11-year-old. I mean, this is like 3 or 4 years ago, so he was younger at the time. And I walked into his bedroom and he was eating a Kit Kat that he'd gotten from a friend in the corner of his room. And I was like, okay, well, this has got to change. And I think that I mention that because I don't know how often parents realize the kind of messages they're sending to their kids, even though I felt like I never really said that to him, like you can't eat cats. I never said he couldn't eat a Kit Kat, but just watching me and feeling that like anxiety about food trauma. And he's very much like me. He's like my mini me. So it just follows that he would probably be the most affected. And anyway, that was really rock bottom for me. And it was actually really good for me to realize like, this is bigger than just you, Emily. You've got to be healthy for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really beautiful that you were able to see it at that point. I'm sure that inspired a lot of soul searching. What was it? What did you end up doing after that?
Well, it was probably around that time too that we were planning I remember it was like a Saturday night in the summer. It was like probably at the end of June. We were planning a 5-day trip to northern Utah. I live in southern Utah, and we were planning a trip to northern Utah over the 4th of July. And my husband came into the kitchen and wanted to talk to me a little bit about plans. And of course, anyone can imagine, of course, if I'm eating 5 to 6 foods, like trying to travel and eat out for 5 days, like that totally just was so upsetting, super worrisome for me to figure out how to do that. And so I was just like, oh, well, this is just so much work to have to go. And he's like, well, what are you worried about? I'm like, well, like packing. And I can help with that, but I'm gonna have to pack all my food. And of course, as I'm just kind of just being grumpy about it. And he finally turned to me and he's like, Emily, you need help. Like, this is not you. Like, the person talking to me right now is not you. And it was so validating. And he actually reminds me, he's like, I said that to you like a year earlier and you didn't really want to hear it. But at that point, like, it was super validating for me to be like, okay, I kind of feel like something's up. Like, I really want to eat. Because I did. I mean, I was so hungry. I wanted to eat all the time. I really wanted to eat. And it was super validating to be like, you know what, maybe this isn't me just not eating perfectly. Maybe it's me being obsessed about it. It was like the first time that I was like, okay, this could change. Like, maybe if I change the way I think about it, I could change the situation. And so he encouraged me to find a therapist. I did. And that was just the best thing for me to have someone that could work with me on the underlying issues of my perfectionism, give me tools and skills for handling anxiety, helping me set boundaries and learn how to say no, and just giving me permission to like be okay being me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel like your food issues started to wane along with that, or did you have to do some specific work around food too and do some kind of structured eating to get that back on track?
So that was what was really interesting. And everyone's experience is different in recovery. So anyone listening, please note that I'm just talking about myself here. But what was super interesting for me is I really didn't talk about food all that much with my therapist. And I had thought about seeing a dietitian at the time, but it was, I was kind of like, I'm just going to work on this stuff and then I'll see where it takes me. And what was so interesting is I innately knew that none of this was about the food. If I could fix like this really unhealthy relationship with this need to feel perfect and be perfect and better than everyone else and all that perfectionistic stuff, I would have an easier time embracing food. And it took a lot to reframe my mind around food, but this is where I feel like my perfectionism actually worked for me, because I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm not going to keep one foot in disordered eating and like a partial, culturally acceptable partial recovery and being able to eat all food. Like I really felt like if I'm going to eat all food, I'm going to eat all food. I'm not going to keep the rules. Like, I'm not going to get on that slippery slope again. And that's where I really feel like my perfectionism worked for me. Like, it was this, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And it helped me. And so I didn't really feel the need to do a lot of like work with a nutrition therapist. I just, read intuitive eating. I really started to try to practice that. However, I did make myself eat every few hours. I won't get into specifics and timing and all of that, but I did give myself a real structure around food. Like, you can choose what to eat. You just don't get to choose when to eat. So I kind of was my own nutrition therapist, which I wouldn't necessarily always recommend, but it worked for me.
Yeah, and probably with the tools of nutrition science and then also the book Intuitive Eating and the concept of intuitive eating, you could sort of figure it out along with the support of a therapist.
Yeah.
Which was exactly my experience, actually. That was very much kind of how it played out for me too. It was therapy sort of uncovered a lot of the underlying issues and helped me develop more compassion for myself and more of a sort of receptivity to the idea of intuition and self-care. And then stumbled across the book Intuitive Eating, and it was like a light bulb went off, and I sort of glommed onto those principles to help me reclaim my relationship with food again, along with therapy. And that thankfully worked for me, but definitely some people need the additional support of a nutrition therapist too for the food stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that what intuitive eating is so great for is giving yourself permission to just eat. And that, I think you probably notice this a lot too. When people come to you, they have a lot of concerns about how much they're eating or when they should eat or what they should eat. And it's almost like they're searching for someone to give them permission to just trust themselves. And that's what intuitive eating did for me. Like, you have full permission to just trust yourself. You don't need all these rules.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of it validates what maybe you already knew at some level, and it's what we're all born knowing how to do. So I think at some level, it's sort of going back to basics for everyone.
Yeah.
To get the permission to do that after years of following rules and years of, I think having the scientific understanding is probably a double-edged sword, because you can certainly use that against yourself and use that to create more and more strict rules with a seeming justification for it.
Mm-hmm.
So to have permission from two very well-respected dietitians who wrote the book and this whole movement of intuitive eating that is supported by science, I think that's really powerful to challenge all those rules.
Agreed. And I'll also say, I think what was super helpful for me too was there was no way I was going to walk down that road again. I knew what a total dead end road it was. So anything that felt anything like that, I just automatically had this huge repulsive feeling for. Like, it just wasn't even appealing to me anymore. And I feel like I just consider that to be a huge blessing for me, because it, like, there was no, like, once I had decided, and I don't know, maybe this is my personality, but once I decided that it wasn't something I was going to spend time with anymore, it was like, well, then I'm not going to.
Right.
Okay, well, then I'm done with it. Like, I've got to figure something better is out there. I know this, because this is not working.
Totally. Yeah, I think there's something about that sort of maybe stubborn and perfectionistic streak that leads many of us into eating disorders, that also leads many of us out of them, or into, if you apply that same kind of strength and solidity to recovery, amazing things can happen.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think about it in terms of weaknesses becoming strengths. Like maybe biggest weaknesses can be our biggest strengths. And that rings so true for me through this experience. Like something that was so hard and such a like a weakness became probably something that I feel most confident and strong.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you go from there then? Did you start to incorporate that into your practice with clients right away? Or did you sort of have a transitional period where you were still doing some old school diet counseling, but building the cognitive dissonance?
Yeah, so this actually coincided with me. I didn't mention this, but I actually earlier on in my career worked probably for the first 5 or 6 years, probably about the time that I left there and this got worse. I actually had worked at a weight loss resort. Very calorie conscious, very judgmental about food and weight. I mean, which is night and day now to my current philosophies and nutrition views, which is, very weight neutral and very non-judgmental about food, non-diet approach. So this was around the time that I actually started my own private practice. So it was a nice transition to be able to leave there and then really feel like I had the freedom to just treat people how I felt was going to be most effective and most helpful. So it was good timing for me. I will say, like, I think that it took some time for me and this is what was so helpful with therapy, to be working with individuals on this type of stuff. You really have to be confident in your own stuff. So it was super helpful for me to be in therapy and be working on that while also, and really being very selective about who I would take on for sure, which I think was super important. And one of those ways that I was taking care of me, which felt really validating and supportive, and not meeting myself where I was at, still moving forward, but not feeling like I had to run the sprint, like run a race. It was a marathon. It would come.
That's awesome. How did you find your therapist in the first place? Did you seek out someone who worked on food issues or?
So I actually, that Saturday night that my husband kind of confronted me on some stuff, I sat right down. You're getting a sense of my personality. Okay, I'm going to do it. So I sat right down and actually looked up therapists in our area and just kind of kept coming back to this one woman and just felt really good about her. So I actually called her. It was a Saturday night, figuring she wouldn't answer. I just thought I'd leave a message and maybe I'd hear back from her Monday in terms of like setting an appointment. And she answered her phone. And I honestly think that was inspired. Like, she answered the phone. I was ready. Who knows what would have happened Monday? Like, honestly, at this point. So it was like divine intervention. I totally believe that. She answered the phone. I made an appointment for the next week, and the rest was history. And what was so great about working with her, and I don't think this has to always be the case for someone working with a therapist, but she was very much like me. She would comment a lot about her own perfectionistic tendencies in her earlier years and how it really resonated with her. Some of my experiences resonated with her. And it just felt like I really connected with her. Like, she deeply understood, I felt, what I was going through and my mindset and how difficult it was to let some of these things go. And that was super healing for me. So it really was the perfect fit.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful when someone can normalize what you're going through and empathize and sort of share that they've been there too. Because I don't know about you, but for me, when I was in that phase, that disordered eating period of my life, I was so ashamed of it too. I was ashamed that I was having those problems. I was ashamed that I didn't have it together in those areas, and it took me a lot to even open up to my therapist about it. So when she empathized and took it seriously and was able to sort of connect it to the other things I was going through, it just made me feel so much more understood and sort of aired out the shame. I stopped holding on to it and stopped feeling isolated with it.
Yes, I love that. I don't know if this was your experience, but as a this kind of hit me in the face. Like, I'm a dietitian and I have no idea how to eat. Like, it was really hard for me. I wasn't ready. I talk pretty openly about it now, but at the time, like, I would never have been this vulnerable about my struggles until I felt like I was in a place where I understood them fully and had kind of embraced them. And just as part of my story, it's just part of who I am. It's part of where I've been. But at the time, like, this was a deep, deep source of shame for me. Like, how did I get to this place?
Yeah, I totally feel you on that. I wasn't quite as far along in my studies, but I had been a journalist for 6 years full time, writing about food and nutrition, and then, went back to school and was studying it. And so I sort of, once I realized, like, oh my gosh, I have a problem, and look at all this knowledge that I have, and look at what I've been writing and what I've been telling people, because I go back, I've recently was sort of working on a personal essay project where I looked back at all these things that I had written back in the day where I was talking about food in such a fearful way. Just seeing these very disordered things that I was saying, that I was like, God forbid, someone in a vulnerable place read that and felt justified or took that as a new rule or something. And God, it was heartbreaking to realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but then, like you said, the process of sort of owning your story and opening up about it kind of unfolds, right? And then it's like it becomes just a part of your practice, a part of your professional identity and who you are in the world. So I'm curious to hear how that went for you.
Yeah, it kind of unfolded little by little, my ability to really talk about it and be honest about it. But that was what was so interesting for me, is the more I talked about it, the more honest I was about it, the more healing I felt, like the more sure of myself, the more sure of where I was going, the more true to my story I was. So I think what was so helpful for me was understanding that this was my story would make it totally irresponsible for me to ever go back to any sort of diet or weight or body image obsession. Like that's my weakness. It can be my strength, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't need really strict boundaries around what I do or don't look at or have in my social media feed, or what I choose to spend time with, what I choose to talk about. Like it's super important for me to be true to that story. And the more I understood it, the faster I healed, the faster I was able to move towards full recovery, because I could be true to it.
Oh, yeah. That very much resonates with my experience too. Because I think once I realized that and started to create a community of, pro-recovery community, I felt so sort of protected, and safe from going back. And I realized the power and the importance of that. And then it was interesting too, because, I think like many of us who work in the field with eating disorders, maybe the first step is starting to work with eating disorders and read the eating disorder literature. And then inevitably you get exposed to health at every size and body positivity and the sort of literature around weight stigma. And I think, unfortunately, the eating disorder treatment community still hasn't fully embraced that, but that information is there and it is staring you in the face at some point in your training if you do go down this road of eating disorder treatment. So for me, that was the next step too, was realizing like I can't be on board with weight loss or weight management for anyone, like regardless of whether they've had an eating disorder, because of all this literature that I'm seeing that shows A, it's not possible or sustainable, and B, it's actually harmful for people to pursue weight loss. And, so in good conscience, I couldn't continue to do that, which, of course, like so many dietitians at the beginning of my career, I did do a little bit of weight loss counseling. So it just, really sort of crystallized everything for me. Like I have to be a part of this community that gets it. And I can't go back, and I can't live with one foot in and one foot out. And I see so many people online now trying to do that, like marketing themselves as body positive while also talking about how you're going to lose weight if you do a particular thing, or just sort of one foot in the diet industry and one foot in intuitive eating and body positivity. And I just knew that was not for me, that I could not do that.
Yeah, you bring up such a good point, which is that the science is there. Oftentimes people feel like, well, intuitive eating is just for those people who do have disordered eating or eating disorders. And it's really not just, it's very inclusive. It's not exclusive. Intuitive eating is inclusive for everyone, regardless of health concerns or regardless of their history, medical history, disordered eating or not. It's so inclusive. And we find that outcomes are far better than weight loss and actively pursuing weight loss. And actively, you mentioned this, actively pursuing weight loss is actually what brings up a lot of these propensities towards disordered eating habits. which again, we just go back to this idea that it's so culturally acceptable that it's super difficult to detect, or for someone to realize that there's actually an issue. It's easy for us to detect.
Yeah, once you know. And
yes.
have the training. Yeah. Did you see the study recently? Maybe it was in 2015, comparing intuitive eating to what they called flexible dietary control, which is, I love that study because it basically looks at this sort of low level control, lifestyle change kind of diet, which is still a diet and it's still part of the diet mentality, but it's not typically thought of in that way. And they compared that sort of lifestyle changey, like portion control, watch what you eat strategy to intuitive eating. And they found that the people who practiced intuitive eating had such better health outcomes on every measure. And it was like, okay, so it's not just for people who've had a history of disordered eating. It's not a compromise. It's not like a consolation prize. It is the thing to do. And it's the thing to do if you want to be healthy.
Yes, it's a perfect example because I just feel like it's so gratifying to see someone really internalize that message of my health is up to me. Like I can trust myself to listen to my body and honor it and respect it. It's nothing about like a set of rules, an outside set of rules. It's very intrinsic, not extrinsic. And for someone to really like internalize that and get it and then see their whole life change, like literally their whole life change, not just food or body image, but even just their whole lives, just relationships change. And it's amazing to have them be more self-directed rather than needing a lot of outside direction.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's so funny how many people who I've seen for intuitive eating counseling who really get it and it really clicks. And then suddenly some major stuff starts happening in their lives that they've sort of put off for a long time because they're pursuing weight loss or that they didn't have the sort of self-awareness or self-care to see before, and suddenly are realizing like, oh my God, my life is set up in a way that is exhausting me and I need to change that. It's really cool to see all the changes that people can make in their lives once they start caring for themselves and listening to their intuition around food. Because like I've said on the podcast before, it's like once you start listening to your intuition around food, you can't really ignore it anywhere else. You know what it sounds like, and it's hard to sort of push it down anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfectly said. Yeah.
That's such a beautiful process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your experience like with health at every size, with sort of coming to that philosophy and that understanding?
Well, it's like hard for me to understand how you don't embrace health at every size when you have this mindset of intuitive eating and no judgment around food and making peace with food and embracing your body and positive body image. And then, of course, understanding the research around the pursuit of weight loss and the issues that can cause. So it was such a natural fit for me. It just kind of made sense that this would fit together and it would be more supportive of actual overall health and wellness and well-being. So the really hard part, I think, in practice, like clinical practice and with clients, is helping them really understand that their health is not determined by weight. That's where I think it's really difficult, like to, in practice, actually help them understand that because they're getting that message everywhere.
Oh, yeah. I know. And for someone who's sort of newly minted as an intuitive eater or health at every size practitioner, as a human practicing health at every size, I think it's tough to sort of resist those messages, or they can shake your foundation a little bit when the foundation is still being created.
Right. Exactly. Yep. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of comments to make them second guess themselves. Like, am I actually okay? Like, is this actually okay? Like, am I really okay?
Yep.
You know?
How do you reassure people in that state? Like, do you have any tips or sort of phrases that you use to help people feel reassured and understand?
Well, I think what's super helpful is just to remember, like to remind them of the path we're walking down and maybe the path that they've been down. Like, where did that get you? Was it at all fruitful? I mean, let's look at all of the benefits you've had from like less anxiety around food, more moderate food choices, less binging, less overeating, more satisfaction with food, feeling well fed, better energy, better sleep. I mean, there's just so many benefits to embracing self-care and taking care of you in a holistic, multifactorial way rather than just food and weight. I think that that's why I so encourage people to be coming back consistently, because anyone listening needs to have that constant support in this culture that really celebrates weight loss and looking a certain way and the thin ideal. And you need that constant support. So I actually spend a lot of time in sessions actually helping people do like social media detoxes and talking about what happens outside of my office. Because I think that's, you can spend an hour a week or every 2 weeks or once a month with me, but then you've got a lot of other hours outside of here that you're going to need that constant reminder. So like you were mentioning earlier, just creating this almost community or support system or just an environment that really is really conducive to those things, health at every size and intuitive eating and making peace with food, which is, I think, just so vital and so needed.
Absolutely. That's such a great point, that, there's all this time to fill and there's all this exposure to the culture, and we can control that to some degree. We have some agency with the social media environment we create or the media that we choose, the mass media that we choose to consume. And that is power, really. But to sort of remind people that they do have that power, I think takes sometimes a few times, a few tries. Mm-hmm. And sort of the support of someone who works in this field, a professional, I think is really helpful too.
Yes, agreed. Yep.
Oh, well, it's so great talking with you. We're coming up to the end of our time together, but tell everybody where they can find you online and anything you want to promote or plug right now.
Yeah, so my website is emilyfonnesbeck.com. It's FONNESBECK.com. And my handle on social media, so Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, is Emily Fonnesbeck. So you can find me there. And then I also blog on my website on the blog tab, and you can find where I talk a lot about these kinds of issues.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure talking with you. And we had circled around each other on social media for so long. So I'm glad to finally be able to have a conversation. It's great.
Agreed. Super great to connect for sure.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to our guest for being here and to you guys for listening. And we'll be back again next week with another brand new episode. Meanwhile, I'd love to stay in touch. And the best way to do that is via email. So you can go to christyharrison.com/email to sign up for my VIP list. I'll send you info about new episodes of the podcast as they drop, as well as exclusive sneak previews of new episodes, exclusive giveaways and other special deals on the products and services I offer, special tips on how to make peace with food and learn to trust your body, and a whole lot more. Sign up at christyharrison.com/email. You can also subscribe via iTunes and leave us a nice rating and review, which is a great way to get the word out about the podcast and help other people find these important messages. Just go to iTunes from your computer or your podcasts app, type in Food Psych to the search bar, click on the result that comes up under podcasts, and then click on ratings and reviews, and you can leave a rating and review right there. And I really appreciate all the 5-star reviews and wonderful ratings that we've gotten, because it's helped us climb really high right now in the rankings. So we're currently in the top 50 of all health podcasts, and that's really cool because we're competing against some of the diet mentality, sort of traditional weight management and body shaming types of messages that I'm trying to fight with this podcast. So we've really started to beat out a lot of the diety voices, and I'd love to continue climbing higher in the rankings to get this message out even further. So please leave us a nice rating and review. It's so very much appreciated. And thanks to everyone who's left reviews so far. The music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now? Bullies want your food, and you ain't really beat. Have you ever went over your friend's house to eat?